Good afternoon, sixth graders. Hope everybody is doing well. Mr. Johnson's over here getting fancy on you. Today, we are going to talk about law and order in the ancient world. When we look back on this development of law and order in the ancient world, we got to start with ancient Mesopotamia, or in this case, Babylon. We're going to talk about this dude named Hammurabi and how he established a set of rules or codes in order to kind of maintain order and justice within the kingdom of Babylon. So on the other side of the world, however, in ancient Egypt, they were practicing what was called Ma'at. And Ma'at was essentially kind of a set of rules that they went by in ancient Egypt in order to maintain what they would call a balance or a harmony with each other. So we're going to discuss that as well. But Mr. Johnson, why do we care? This happened thousands of years ago. Well, we need to care because this set the stage, guys. This established this concept of rule and law and justice within the world. Because remember, this is when we're first becoming a civilization. So the concept that there needed to be justice and there needed to be some sort of framework and rules for us to follow in order to establish a very successful civilization, this was all new. This was something that was just becoming an established idea. Okay. And much of what we practice now and many of the concepts that we use when it comes to law and authority within different countries, and particularly our country, were established on many of these principles that began back in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. As Mesopotamia began to grow and expand, obviously the populations continued to grow and get much larger within those cities. And when you have more people, it's necessary to actually have some sort of order and rules for people to follow. Otherwise, it could lead to straight chaos. So you have to develop some form of justice within that system. Whoa, wait a minute. Not that kind of justice. There we go. Much better. Now that's justice. That form of justice in Mesopotamia came in the form of Hammurabis Code, or the Code of Hammurabi. Now, it's important to note here, as was always the case in these ancient civilizations, this was, of course, dictated by God. Hammurabi was the man who was responsible for ruling the kingdom of Babylon and essentially derived all of his powers from the gods themselves. At least that's what he told his people. Hammurabi's Code provided guidance and frameworks for laws involving family law, property law, government guidelines, and of course, criminal law. Within this code, there was a concept of equality and a balance. This was essentially a guidebook for how judges within Babylon would rule on cases or disputes between parties. Hammurabi's Code became synonymous with the concept of an eye for an eye, which was Code 196 in Hammurabi's Code. Now, it's important to note that this concept of seeking retribution against someone who's committed a crime in the same form or fashion that they committed against you was mostly established in order to prevent crimes against the aristocracy, essentially using fear to prevent crimes being committed against wealthy people. Clearly, we don't practice concepts like an eye for an eye today. However, we can't overlook the impact that Hammurabi's Code had on the modern legal system, not only within the US, but throughout the world. But now it's time to go ahead and take a look at their neighbors and see what was going on with the justice system down there in ancient Egypt. No, definitely not those Egyptians. Phew. Okay, there we go. All right, real Egyptians. Now, Egyptian law and order is actually pretty interesting because it's based on a concept called Ma'at. And what Ma'at is kind of this concept or idea that we need to strike a balance or a harmony in pretty much everything we do. Daily life in ancient Egypt was centered around the concept of Ma'at. Ma'at meant being considerate of others, mindful of one's place in the social hierarchy, performing like the proper rites concerning veneration of gods and respect for one's ancestors. Basically, observing the correct rituals and honoring nature to care for the environment of wildlife. So basically, kind of a best practice for how to live your life. That's what the concept of Ma really focused on. Most interesting about Mod is that it also kept the kings and queens accountable, ensuring that the balance of justice applied to everyone. However, we have to keep it in perspective and remember that they were still kings and queens, so I'm pretty sure they were afforded much more leeway than the commoners. Also of note that came out of ancient Egypt in terms of the legal system was the concept of a jury or a trial by jury. Although it was ultimately a jury of wealthy people and more powerful of Egyptian citizens. All right, nevertheless, the idea that a group of people would help decide your fate in the court of justice was something that was a novel idea and would help impact future legal systems. And finally, when it comes to punishments in ancient Egypt, it basically depended and varied on one of two factors. One being whether or not you committed a crime against the state or an individual, and depending on your social status. Essentially, if you committed a crime against the state, which was basically the same as a crime against the pharaoh or the gods, you were subjected to much harsher punishment than if you committed a crime against an individual. Well, there you have it, sixth graders. That is a brief crash course in the legal system of the ancient world. Okay, so make sure you guys go ahead and click down there in the description tab of this video in order to go ahead and go to different sources. I've got a couple of additional videos and a couple of articles that I want you guys to kind of go through in order to answer the discussion questions that again are down there in the description box. So make sure you answer those as well. Now, this is just a brief snapshot, a brief portion of what the legal system sort of looked like in ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. All right, there's plenty of additional information out there that you guys can peruse to. Some of it's pretty interesting, to be quite honest. Some of it's a little ruthless for those of you who kind of like that brutal type of stuff. Punishment back then, man, it was harsh. Okay, so make sure you go ahead, answer those discussion questions in the comment section below, and continue to follow the page in order to get additional information and future videos and assignments. All right, so sixth grade, again, stay safe out there. And remember, when it comes to social distancing or what we call, those stay-at-home orders, so to speak, make sure when you think about it, it didn't just happen overnight. Orders, laws, rules, and all these things we're currently having to comply with today started way back thousands of years ago. Okay, so just keep that in mind and keep that in perspective. We all have rules we got to follow, whether we like it or not. All right, I hope to see you guys soon. Make sure you guys are staying safe. Talk to you later.